Welcome to the CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Collecting Cars podcast. Today with me is Andrew Frankel, one of the UK's best motoring writers, historic racer, and also quite good pal of mine. We've actually moved out of London for the day to be with Andrew down in the Wye Valley because he's been a bit under the weather for the last week. But being a trooper, he said he's going to roll out and chat with me. He is my go-to pub banter person, really, Andrew, so this could degenerate. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I also need to get the standard stuff out. I am at Harris Monkey. This is at Collecting Cars. Edward Lovett sadly can't be here. He has to go to a meeting because he's the suit involved in all of this. Andrew's handles are on Twitter at Frankel Andrew.
Close.
No, at
Twitter is at Andrew_Frankel.
Instagram is
Frankel Andrew.
And most importantly, a really great little venture he's got going with a friend of ours called Dan Prosser is something called Drive Nation. Go to Instagram and have a look at that. That's basically car news, reviews, opinion in bite-sized chunks on Instagram. It's taking off nicely. 20,000 followers now?
Something like that, getting there, yeah.
So go and have a look at that. And that is at...
That is at Drive Nation _ because
Right.
somebody had already got Drive Nation.
Well, so that's the housekeeping out of the way. Right, before we get involved in anything else, we need to discuss this race yesterday, okay? So this will be broadcast a few days after the Canadian Grand Prix, but as you'll know, yesterday there was an incident during the Grand Prix during which Sebastian Vettel left the circuit with Lewis Hamilton in hot pursuit. You could say he was pressured into a mistake. He rejoined the circuit and has been penalised 5 seconds for rejoining in an unsafe manner. That altered the results, meant Lewis took a somewhat hollow victory, and we've seen all sorts of shenanigans since, and it's generated lots of debate. Andrew, let me tell you now before we begin, you cut him, he bleeds Maranello.
Well, I do when it comes to racing, and it's really, really strange, and I've never really quite understood why, because I think I can. I know I can. I can be completely objective about the road car products, and I think I've probably been as tough on the stuff that on the not good stuff that they've made over the last 30 years I've been doing this as anyone. But when it comes to racing, all my objectivity just goes out the window. I just want them to win, and I don't care who's in the other cars. I just want Ferrari to win, and I sit down, and however strangely Ferrari behave, however many times they threaten to leave Grand Prix racing and throw all the toys out the pram. Next race I'm sitting there, and I just want them to win. Now I know that you are a massive Lewis fan. My sort of the way I've looked at Lewis has gone really, really up and down. I'm on a big Lewis up at the moment. I think he's fantastic. A couple of years ago, I really wasn't sure because I think to me it's as much about how you behave out of the car as in it. And to me, that counts for much more than world championships. But I just think that what happened yesterday was more than anything else. I think it was just a really, really bad thing for Formula One, which, let's face it, is in enough trouble as it is. And the one thing that, I think we could be looking at a complete Mercedes-Benz whitewash this year. I mean, if there was a circuit at which Ferrari had a chance, I would say that Canada, with a combination of long straights and slow corners, was probably as good as any they were going to get to go to. And for it to be taken away like that, where, quite clearly, to me at least, Vettel, I don't know what he was doing. He's probably doing 150 miles an hour at that time. On the grass, you don't really have an awful lot of choice over the trajectory of the car. And he came back on and, there was no contact. And I just think that this was Formula One saying to itself, well, actually, we've got a chance of a really, really good race. We've got a chance of changing the narrative a little bit. Let's just not bother.
It's strange, isn't it? Because the back at the FIA, the person involved in making the decisions, the steward for drivers' behaviour, conduct, was Emanuele Pirro, guy that you know. So this, it's an odd decision, isn't it? You wouldn't have expected, and he's a driver's driver.
Yeah, I don't know how much time they get to make the decision. I don't know how much pressure they feel under. It was an odd decision, and we're all capable of making odd decisions. I've known Emanuele, I don't know him well, but I've known him for a few years. He is the nicest, fairest, most decent bloke you could ever come across in this sport. A person less likely to have an angle than him, I can't imagine. But I don't understand why he concluded the way that he did.
Okay, so let's slightly view the anatomy of this incident. I'm going to play devil's advocate at times. And you'll know my position on this at the end of it. First of all, we've got 20 laps to go or whatever, and we're gloves off. We've got arguably the two best drivers in F1 in the two best machines. I think that's open for debate. I'm not sure Vettel is one of the two best drivers in Formula One. I'm sure that Lewis is the best, but I think Sebastian's been exposed a bit in the last couple of years, and I think at the moment the way sport's configured, you're judged by how few mistakes you make. And sadly, Sebastian has made lots of mistakes in the last couple of years. By the by, he's a 4-time world champion. He has a level of skill that neither of us could even dream of having. He's under pressure. He's following another car. There's a reduction downforce. It's a back marker. Goes into that sort of flick-flack right-left. Canada as a circuit, by the way, terrifies me. Just looks like a place where you can just have a crash at every corner and it would hurt. Back of the car steps out. He somehow ends up on the grass. I mean, in itself, we should be celebrating the fact that on the grass, on slick tyres with 1,000 horsepower, he's gathered the thing up. I think most mortals would have ended up interfacing with something quite solid and be out of the race. You and I would have just been off in the wall. So the bloke saved it, and the speeds of which we're looking at corrections, if you watch it full time, you can't even see his hands move, can you? And he gets back on the circuit and then produces, the ever-decreasing gap for Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, being the racer, sees his opportunity, sees the right-hand side, go to the outside, and thinks, I'm going for it. And that gap closes, and the only way to stop the accident is for Lewis to back out of it. I'm a huge Lewis fan, but I don't know what else Sebastian Vettel could have done. There's a lot of discussion around the fact that he looks right into his mirror, but we're dealing with fractions of a second here, and I think he'd do that instinctively anyway. What I don't understand is that ultimately, when you're the bloke that's finally pushed the guy in front to making a mistake, which occasionally we get to do, it's a great feeling because you think, haha, gotcha, I've been waiting for this for a while, I've been pushing you. You haven't completed the job then. You've got to still get past them. And if they only leave you a bit of room, then that's your decision whether you go for it or not. And if you go for it and it doesn't work, it's kind of tough cookie. It was probably a bad call. So I don't really understand what else Vettel could have done. I'd love to be sitting here saying that I think Lewis deserved that, but I just don't think he did. I think also Lewis has proved himself to be a masterful strategist in the last couple of years. That's what's been really impressive about Lewis. He's gone from being this impetuous individual that made decisions based on an outcome 2 minutes ahead, whereas now you get the feeling he's looking at the longer game, and that's the mark of a true champion when they're looking at sort of legacy results. And look, the language of Lewis's car said to me, I had a go 10 laps ago, it didn't work. I'll settle for second because I'm still going to win this world championship. That's what the language of his car said to me. So the fact that he had a bit of a pop and it didn't work, that was that really. It was done.
I don't think that Lewis actually did, I don't think there was much more that Lewis could have done. I mean, I don't think he did anything other than what you would have expected him to do in those situations, which was try to maximise, the most of a situation which he had, quite rightly engineered. I don't think that there was anything else that Vettel could have done. I mean, the car was travelling so fast, it's come back onto the track. I've heard people saying, we should have kept left. I just don't even, I don't presume to imagine for a moment how you would even go about ensuring that.
Well, the track is dirty on the left as well. What you don't see on TV coverage is that the circuit, when it's evolved and rubbered in, is usable. But if you're off that, you're like you're on ice.
I mean, to me, it was a classic racing incident, except it wasn't even an incident. And that is why, if there had been, I don't know, some kind of contact or, Lewis had lost a bit of front wing or something and had been disadvantaged, then I don't know, maybe that would be grounds for looking at it, but there wasn't even any, there was nothing at all. And I think to penalise him and to affect, it wasn't a 5 seconds penalty, given that the way the cars have been running for as long as they've been running, that was a demotion. It wasn't a 5 second penalty, it was a demotion from first to second place. And I just thought it was all wrong. A word about Lewis, I think you're absolutely right. I think what has changed so much about him is that the way that he thinks under pressure now is just unlike anything I've ever seen in any racing driver. He has the fight of a true racing driver with a brain of a sort of a Lauda. The way he can think under pressure, the way he can position his car. I mean, last season I'm struggling to think of a mistake he made. Did he spin anything last season? He might have done in quali, or I don't think he did in quali. He might have done in practice. I can't remember him making a significant mistake in any race for the duration of last season. And that, regardless of results, must make him unique among the entire F1 grid at the moment.
Yeah, he's dead impressive. So 2 points on this penalty then, and where it sits with Formula One. Whether you agree with these or not. First is, I think the morning after the night before, if people are discussing a penalty more than they are the drivers and the cars and the race, then the sport's making some big mistakes. You shouldn't be talking about... the conversation shouldn't be around, the driver's steward. It should be around the two great pugilists we saw.
That's the sadness, isn't it? Because to me, the people that I speak to at the moment aren't talking about Formula One very much at the moment, because there's, we are, as I said earlier, we are looking at a potential whitewash. And the moment that there is a topic to actually talk about, it's completely negative. And it's about how Formula One has, yet again, from, a pretty, from their point of view, ideal PR set of circumstances, i.e. something other than a Mercedes about to win a race, have managed to pull the rug out from under themselves.
And the other one is, just imagine if you were to have a set of rules and sub-clauses around the area of overtaking, rejoining a circuit, whatever this grey area is we're talking about, and you applied them to MotoGP now. Can you imagine? I mean, you see as many overtaking manoeuvres in one lap of a MotoGP race as you do in an entire Formula One race.
Or season.
Yeah. Just imagine if you had that level of scrutiny presiding over potential overtakes, undertakes, the legalities of overtaking in MotoGP. Be busy, wouldn't they?
But that's the entire point of having someone like Emanuele making those decisions. Now, as I've said, I don't understand why he reached the conclusion that he did, but it is to produce a degree of discretion where, a sensible person who's been there and done it himself can say, no, that's just a racing incident. And yes, technically they may have infringed some rule, but there's something bigger than that going on here, so we're going to let it go.
Unbelievable. So I think we'll leave Formula One alone for a bit, because it can maybe get quite depressed. But my worry about Formula One is that my children don't like it. They have an interest in it.
Do they like Formula E?
No, they don't. They just don't have. They don't have any interest in a sport that lasts that long, takes up half a Sunday, and not much happens.
See, that's quite interesting. I mean, your oldest is of the sort of age where Formula E should be coming onto the radar, and if it's not, I mean, that's the sort of age category that they're after. They're after the long-term voters, and if it's not engaging them, then that is it's not you or me that they're after at all.
I just feel that Formula One is slightly meandering towards a Kodak moment, where just when it ends for it could end overnight, really quickly, because its profitability is based on the support of car manufacturers. The broadcasting rights go down in value every single year, and it's completely missed a generation. There's a generation of young people out there now that neither care about it or are interested in it. And one day you could just wake up and find that Mercedes decided to go in the same year, and Ferrari thinks, we're going to go into esports, and before you know it, it's not there.
What could happen, of course, is that Formula One was obviously never configured that way. It was originally about racing teams like McLaren, about Williams, teams that existed to race, not teams that existed to sell road cars or make fizzy drinks or anything like that. And I think, as we've seen in the WEC, if you have a sport, it's a sort of Faustian pact, isn't it, where you are dependent upon the money of people whose primary business is not racing cars, then you are always at risk of that money going away.
Yeah. That was always Bernie's line, wasn't it? Car makers, they come and go, teams are permanent. And he's right. You also get the feeling that if Bernard had been around yesterday, he wouldn't have allowed that to happen. He would probably have said, no, we need a red car to win for once.
Yeah, it would have been good, wouldn't it?
Right, road cars. So your day job is still to review far more road cars than I do. You've been doing it much longer than me as well. And outside your house at the moment is one of the worst things I've ever seen.
You're not talking about my daughter's fit Toyota Aygo.
No, I'm not. I wouldn't say that. But the front end of the BMW X7 is a study in everything that's gone wrong with car design. Discuss.
Yeah, I think you're fairly close to it. I think it is, and what I find particularly difficult about it is that it is based on something that we all used to love.
Yeah.
I mean, the BMW grille. When I grew up with, E21s and E28s, and I just used to love that. It was such a great lesson in I think the Ponzi term is design language, how to establish an identity for a car, and to take it and to turn it into what you have on that. I don't know what the thinking is. There must be some very clever marketing people behind it thinking, this makes, because there's more of it and it's bigger and it's more in your face, people will recognise us more and therefore somehow want to buy our products more. But I don't understand it, and I hope it doesn't last.
It looks like a massive bum to me. That's my sophisticated deconstruction of the style. I don't understand it either. I thought 4 headlights and that grille was one of the great pieces of design, and so identifiable that you could spot a BMW so far in the distance. But the gradual creep's been coming since about 1988. Can you remember the outcry when BMW launched the V12 E32 7 Series, the 750i and the IL? And the V12 car had a slightly wider,
the wider
kidney grille.
Yes.
And everyone that basically couldn't handle 911s becoming better than the last one just got out of bed. The cognoscenti went, well, this is outrageous. We can't have a wider kidney grille. It looks particularly wrong. And it was actually an inch wider than the other one, or less, 0.5 mil wider. But it's got worse now.
It's got massively. I wonder whether it sort of harkens back to, back in the day, cars like that would have had to have had massive radiator grills because they needed massive radiators, because they needed an awful lot of cooling. And, this is something that obviously Rolls-Royce has done. I presume we're going to come on to the Cullinan fairly shortly. But I don't know. To me, it has to fit as an integral part of the design, and it just doesn't. And it just looks awful, particularly the relationship between you have these very narrow lights and then you have this massive grille.
So lights are becoming smaller because LED technology means you don't need as big a surface area, lenses and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Grills get bigger. To me, it just increasingly looks like all cars have a worse and worse case of conjunctivitis and are screaming louder. They just get narrower eyes and bigger mouths.
Yes.
So actually, the metaphor is they're all crying for help, because maybe I can use that as a really cheesy segue. The X7 is an amazing piece of technology. It's a great big, vast SUV that's packed. Is it 48 volt? I presume it is, like they all are now. Is it? It has turbochargers and multiple cylinders and will carry 7 people in huge amounts of comfort at 155 miles an hour, I'm sure. But it's obsolete before it's even been sold, isn't it? That car. That's the car we'll look back on in 20 years' time and say, oh my Lord, did we get to that place?
Yeah. But you need to be careful with this, because I've been saying exactly this for at least 20 years. Ever since I don't know what started it. I mean, X5 or even before that, RAV4s, whatever, the rise of the recreational SUV or the all-purpose SUV. The idea that something that is bigger, higher, heavier, more profligate is somehow also better is something that I've been struggling with all this time. I've been predicting the downfall of these cars for 20 years, and I have to therefore concede that I've been completely wrong.
But not just the SUV. I just mean that configuration of vehicle, internal combustion engine, vast amounts of weight, very expensive, ugly. I get the feeling I do think we're at the end of it. I do think that if you bought, what's that, £100,000, that thing?
With extras, yeah, over.
So £100,000 family car. I mean, that's not for holidays and holidays. It's an everyday car to rival a Range Rover or a GL or whatever you call it these days.
Yeah.
And if you bought that now, so you wouldn't pay £100,000 for it. You'd pay £25,000 probably as a deposit, and then BMW Financial Services would relieve you of £1,500 a month or something like that. You have to insure it and all the other stuff, and you'd be on a 3-year deal. I think that within 3 years, the rapid electrification of everyday vehicles could mean that thing's worth 20 grand. So you could be staring at one of the worst negative equity situations of your life. I think that's where we're at the moment. I think the tipping point is coming with vehicles like that.
Yeah, I think the whole electrification thing is, the one thing that I have become convinced of, I think we're going to have a really wobbly 2, maybe 3 years. But once the infrastructure is there, which it will be, then I think that people's concerns about range and recharging time will go away. because I think you will be able to drive from London to Edinburgh with one 20-minute stop in the middle, which you'd probably want to take anyway. And at which stage, you've cracked it.
So what happens to that thing out there? What's the value in it?
Well, okay, so it's probably not worth very much after that, particularly that one, which is diesel powered as well. So you can imagine where that's going to go. But the thing that I still struggle with, in fact, there are lots of things about electrification that I struggle with, from the true emissions and the true outputs of all these things, from the way they're made to the way that they're recycled to child labour mining cobalt in DRC, which goes into all these batteries of all these cars and our smartphones as well. But also the mass, you think that's heavy, do an electric one of those and see what you come up with.
Yeah.
That's going to be heavier still. So, I think, clearly cars like that with very old-fashioned internal combustion engines are, if not on, I don't think they're on their last legs. I think they'll be with us for a while because I think people will take time to adopt. And I don't buy the narrative that cars are going to get lighter. I think with increasing electrification, even if it's just with hybrid drives, I think they're going to get heavier, which depresses me. So I think, in time, cars like that will be seen as dinosaurs. But as I've said, I've been saying this for a very long time.
Yeah, I do have sleepless nights about it now because I don't quite understand where it's going. Selfishly, it has an impact on the way we earn a living because I sell passion about cars, and I have to be real. I can't be false. And I don't have an awful lot of passion for electric cars at the moment. I'm trying very hard. The Tesla Model 3 is the one that I've enjoyed the most. But even that, once I'd shut the door and walked away from it, I didn't turn around and look at it. It was just another very impressive device.
I think there are two things going on here. I think, firstly, I can see absolutely. What was I driving the other day? iPace, best electric car I've driven. And I was also in the Audi e-tron, which is a very credible device for doing that particular job. But to me, it's not driving. It's a family hold-all that goes from one place to another. And I can see electric cars doing that job very well. What I can't see, and I have seen, I've spoken, as you have, to a lot of very, very clever, very senior engineers, is how you make an electric car interesting to drive, fun to drive. I couldn't tell you how uninterested I am in the fact that these electric concept cars come out now with 2,000 horsepower. To me, that is absolutely not the way to go. It's not what it's about. It's about driver interaction. It's about all the stuff that you and I bang on in the pub about relentlessly, and I can't see it happening. I also think that there is a qualitative thing going on there. You and I love wearing bits of engineering on our wrists. Things with cogs and wheels and little springs and that sort of thing, because it's not because we think that a mechanical watch tells the time very well. You and I very well know that they don't. It's because we just like having that engineering around with us. We just like being in touch with that sort of thing and the passion that went into its design and its skill and its knowledge. And I just don't see that. I can't see people getting revved up about an electric car in the same way. In the same way no one gets revved up about, has anybody ever shown you the electric watch they have on their wrist? It's never happened to me.
Yeah, it was interesting. Neil, who's sitting with us doing some recording at the moment, we went to drive the 919 last year, the crazy Le Mans winning Porsche, and the crown jewels of that project is an electric motor that Porsche developed in-house. That's the front motor, the most compact, efficient motor ever fitted into any kind of motor vehicle, and quite top secret. It produces, 500 horsepower or something crazy. I mean, it really isn't very big. And they ushered us into a room to see this motor. And excuse this in front of the family viewers, I just couldn't give a shit. If it had been like a 1.5 litre V12, I basically would have had a trouser tent, and I couldn't have, but they ushered us into this room and said, it's here. And I was like, well, a coffee machine. Because it's just a cylinder, isn't it? It's a really strange thing. I was fascinated by what it could do and what effect it might have on the propulsion of the vehicle. But the object itself, just didn't care.
I mean, by stark staring contrast, I can remember going to a test track in Japan, to Chigi, I think.
Never say that again when I've got a mouthful.
Sorry, to Chigi. And Honda they're bringing a load of stuff over for the Festival of Speed, and so they had this day where they wheel it all out and they run them around just to make sure they're all functioning properly before they get on the boat or however they get over here. And they wheeled out a motorbike. I know nothing about motorcycles at all, but this one, it was a 125 with 6 cylinders.
Yes.
And it revved to over 20,000, and I think it was built in 1964. And there was all this stuff around, and all I wanted to do was dribble over a motorcycle I knew nothing whatever about, because I just thought about, how big I just wanted to see a piston.
What's the speed of it?
What's the speed? What's the power output? What's it like? And then they fired the thing up, and it sounded utterly insane. And, it's just the sort of stuff that, that I live for. But does that say more about you and me than it does about the stuff they're pouring over? Is it just a generational thing, and are our children going to grow up equally passionate about stuff which is of no interest or relevance to us at all?
We will be laughed at in 50 years' time, people like you and I, as being wasteful dinosaurs, and I'm slightly ashamed of that, but I'm not going to hide my passions, and to have something that burns resources as quickly as that motorcycle engine does, and emits such horrible poisons into the atmosphere and all of those things, I can't defend that. But I can't not celebrate it either. I have to celebrate it, because I just think I love the preposterous engineering that's gone into a needless object. I love that. I really do. And I love that when we look back, we'll be judged so badly by future generations. We really will. And we used to get super excited. In fact, the reason for our existence was based around the fact that, someone would bring out a 4-valve head for a hot hatchback and give us an extra 20 horsepower. I mean, the scheme of life it is embarrassing.
Yeah, boy, it was exciting, wasn't it? Didn't you want to drive it?
I did, and I think we'll be judged harshly. So, you began your writing career at Autocar when 1990 or was it
1988?
88.
Day after Jaguar won Le Mans.
What did you do before that?
Thank you for asking. Quite a few things. So, I sort of bypassed the whole university thing, and when
by choice?
Well, by indolence mainly. When you are in that position, and if you are in a position to, the only way you can survive with any kind of credibility at all is go and be, I think the phrase is, something in the city. So which is what I did, and I was very briefly a bond dealer, and I was then a commodity broker. It might have been the other way around. But I lasted about 6 months in each job before.
During those 6 months, you did make an appearance in a national newspaper.
Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Yes, Andrew Frankel, 21, commodity broker, Mail on Sunday, approximately 1987. And anyone wants to go and look it up. It was in the colour supplement under the title of Hooray Henry Ate My Goldfish. This was the Hooray Henry. That was the subject of the story. It wasn't actually me, and I've not yet had the delight of eating a goldfish. But it was just some stupid scavenger hunt that I went on in a Mark 1 MR2 with my girlfriend, which I remember more for the fact that the first thing we had to collect on day one was a huge lump of goat's cheese. Which she refused to have in the boot of the MR2 with her ball gown. So I had to live in the cockpit for a week in the middle of the summer driving through France in an unair-conditioned MR2 with half a pound of goat's cheese. And it is absolutely no lie to say from that day to this I have not touched the stuff. But anyway, there was a journalist along with us who, as all good journalists do, befriended all of us, thought we were completely wonderful until he wrote a story in the newspaper telling the world what a bunch of charlatans we were.
It sounds like he wasn't wrong.
The stuff they reported, I would say this, wouldn't I? I don't remember seeing, but there were quite a few of us doing it, and I certainly don't doubt that it went on.
We'll come back to that actually, because I think this idea of the Gumball style driver collective rally is still going. It's been going a long time. It's just morphed into something that is difficult to understand at the moment. But let's come back to this working thing, because you and I did something fairly similar in that we realised that we weren't cut out for civilian life, and therefore we had to go and follow the thing that had until that point taking up a lot more of our time than we probably admitted, which was reading car magazines. So once you realised that you weren't going to set the world alight as a commodities broker, and you didn't want to be called Andy, what did you go and do?
I decided I was going to get serious, and I was going to become a lawyer. And I got through the first year of the law degree okay, and then a thing called the Law of Property Act or Land Law or something, and it was this massive tome just landed on the desk in front of me. And my tutor said, by the end of this year, you will have learned every word of this. And I just knew I wouldn't. I just knew I couldn't. It was not something that I had the power to do. So that was the end of law. So I went home and watched daytime telly. You're probably too young to remember Crown Court.
Yeah.
But Crown Court was a wonderful series where actors played out a scene, and then a real jury selected from stout and honest members of the public would decide whether the person in question was guilty or not. And this was fantastic, but probably not a great way of earning a living. Anyway, a friend of my brother's, spotted an advert in the Media Guardian for a envelope-licking job at Autocar, and only because I saw it very late did I ring up just to see if the job was still available. And they told me that it was, because they had 400 applications and hadn't begun to get through them. And I think probably the only smart thing I did was say, is there anything I can do to make my application stand out? And they said that rather foolishly, they just asked for CVs on the ad, so nobody had sent in an example of their writing. I had a Renault 5 at the time, and so I wrote up something about that. I couldn't type, but my brother knew somebody who could, so it got typed up, sent in, I got an interview, and yeah, that was Autocar.
So you've been given this job at Autocar magazine, being paid 3/5 of nothing, I'd have thought, and you're chief ashtray or whatever it is you start out as.
Yeah.
But like me, did you have a sense that you'd finally got to the place where you belonged?
Except I did. It's where I wanted to be, but they didn't want me to be there. I think the term is lied quite a lot to get myself there, and perhaps somewhat over-egged my abilities as both a driver and a writer. And, quite a few people at the magazine, quite a few senior members of staff at the magazine weren't shy about making it clear that they regarded my time there as limited, to the extent that when I asked the editor why he hadn't put my name on the flannel panel, his entirely honest response was because I'd only have to take it off again. And really what turned it around was Mel Nichols, who many will know, editor of Car in the 70s, the man who, with others, turned Car into the most incisive, interesting... I still look back at those magazines in the 1970s and in awe of what they achieved.
Absolutely,
back then.
and I think for the benefit of the audience that don't know who Mel is, both of us, Andrew and I, see him as definitely a father figure in our careers. He was at Haymarket when I was there as well. He was in the first two of the great Australians that came over to redefine motoring journalism in Europe. For whatever reason, it was Australians that did it. And he had an ability to write in almost a stream of consciousness style, that rather than empirically road test a vehicle, he told a story and put you in the seat of the vehicle and took you along for the ride. And for people like myself and Andrew, it was utterly captivating, certainly enough to fail public exams over.
Yes, and the way that you emerge from those stories, somehow in possession of all the facts about the car, having been entirely unaware of the fact that you've been reading the facts at all. It was you read them for the story. I mean, some of the amazing stories that we
came over the hill into the valley.
Yeah, those sorts of stories. That his drive story of the Daytona, the convoy trip back in the Lamborghinis from Sant'Agata, and all those sorts of stuff. And at the end of it, somehow you knew all about the car as well. It was astonishing journalism.
So Mel, at this stage, Mel was editorial director of Haymarket?
So Mel was editorial director at Haymarket. So crucially, he wasn't daytime staff at Autocar. And all the people at Autocar had time to do was to say that what I was doing was wrong. And when I went to Mel, really pretty much as a sort of last resort, because I thought I was headed out the door, he looked at what I was writing and he went, yeah, they're absolutely right, it is wrong. But what he did was he said, here are perhaps one or two ways in which you might be able to think about putting it right. And he worked with me, not that much, but a little bit. He invested a little bit of time in me. And I can remember, I went to do one story, and it was because it was an old car. It was a bit more the sort of ground that I was more comfortable with. And yeah, I just kind of tried to apply what he suggested. And somebody came up to me afterwards and went, wow, that's actually not bad. And after that, I guess some kind of penny dropped somewhere and I've been away. And then absolutely, as you suggest, that is where I felt I belonged. And bizarrely, 30-something years later, I'm still working for them.
6 years after that, maybe less, 5.5 years after that, you're out the door, or you think you're out of the door, another career that hasn't worked. I know exactly how you feel. That's how I was. I was just useless. You're actually on the Yorkshire moors and you're road testing the McLaren F1.
Yeah, it was good.
So it's not a bad career progression. I mean, you wrote that road test. I've still got it. I have it wherever I live. I have that road test by the throne. It's a magazine that I have to have. It's just an amazing piece of writing, and I think I still look at the numbers in a sense of utter fantasy about this vehicle that was from another planet. So what was that like?
Well, it was all sorts of things. I mean, just the specifics writing of the road test, I got a lot of stick for it at the time because I was told that the test itself lacked a sense of occasion because I wrote it very straight. If you look at the opening paragraph, it just says the McLaren F1 is a 6.1 litre V12 627. Blah, blah, blah. It's just completely straight.
Of course, history judges you having made exactly the right decision because it now sits as a document without hyperbole. It's just something you go back to that you absorb. And I think you made absolutely the right decision.
Well, you're very kind. The thought process at the time was simply that if ever a car didn't need to be bigged up, this was it. If ever a car was capable of speaking for itself, this was it. But the test itself, I kind of tied up the loose ends at the end of the organisation, but it probably took 2 years to set up because McLaren had made clear from the start that they were only going to let one magazine test the car. And whatever the numbers were, they were the numbers that McLaren would use and that everybody else would use, and those would be the numbers, the official numbers for the car. And it was by no means clear at the start that Autocar would get that. Because Autocar back in 92 was still sort of rebuilding from, it had not been in a very good state in the mid-1980s. And it was very definitely on the mend and going in the right directions. But you can imagine, there were lots of other publications who thought that was their story. And people on the magazine, more senior to me, made it happen. And then I just sort of organised the nuts and bolts of it. And then it was all going to happen on May the 2nd, 1994, which it did. And on May the 1st, 1994, as many people listening to this will remember, Ayrton Senna got killed.
Yeah.
Which to us was a terrible, terrible thing, as it was for millions of people around the globe. I mean, at Autocar, we idolised the bloke. But for McLaren, it was, for people like Gordon Murray, who'd led the teams, who designed the cars, in which he won all 3 of his world championships, for Jonathan Palmer, who was going to be with us all the time, who was McLaren's test driver and Ayrton Senna's teammate, therefore. I mean, we didn't even know if they were going to turn up the following day. And I think that's when I knew what professionalism was about. Following day, they were all there and they were all fine, and we got on and we did the job. So it'll always have bittersweet memories for me. There's no denying that. But at the same time, I got in this car and yeah, it just completely changed the way I thought a road car could behave. It expanded the envelope. It wasn't just, a bit more in every direction. It was a completely new level. And don't forget, by then we'd had the EB110 and we'd had the XJ220 and we'd had the F40. I mean, we knew what quick cars were like. And then suddenly this thing comes out of nowhere. And it's once in a generation car. And I think, funnily enough, we're probably going to have another fairly shortly with the Valkyrie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was that kind of car. There's not been a car, I've been very lucky to drive, all the mainstream hypercars that have come since and that sort of thing. And there is nothing that has come close to moving the goalpost the way that car did.
I think it's an amazing document, that particular magazine, because you see the date and you do think, crikey, that's when it happened, because you published it very quickly afterwards as well, wasn't it? You didn't hang around, you didn't hold on to it for a couple of weeks like you would 3 weeks, 4 weeks like we used to in the past. I think 2 weeks later that was published, that story, wasn't it?
From memory, it might have been the May the 11th issue. I can't remember, but yes. Yeah. And I don't know why, because normally with something like that, if we knew that nobody else had got it or anything like it, we'd sit in it and we'd refine it because there'd be nothing to lose. I suspect we knew that although we'd be doing the numbers,
Car Magazine had a story that was going to come out.
And we didn't just want to be first, we wanted to be first and best.
So controversially, I've only driven one F1, standard road car. preferred the F50 on the road. I thought the F50 was a nicer car to drive. Nothing like as fast, but certainly the McLaren was just this out of control powertrain that was so violently fast with this chassis and braking system that was spent the whole time trying to keep up with what was going on. That's what it felt like to me. Whereas the F50, I'd always read as being the poor relative, but I just thought was a sensational road car.
Yeah,
and the whole package just felt like it worked together. It was, homogeneous whole. Everything worked seamlessly. It had great brakes. It had the right amount of braking for the performance. The chassis worked. Whereas the McLaren, I just felt too angry to me.
Yeah, I've never said the F1 was the best road car that I ever drove. I always said it was the F40, funny enough. I too was a huge fan of the F50. I thought it was a thing to get in and drive. It was such a nice car to drive, particularly the terms of the way that it behaved on the limit. It was a car that you didn't mess about with an F1 on the limit at all, and people who tried often got quite badly burnt. I don't mean that literally. But with an F50, you could hoof it about, and it had that extraordinary powertrain. I also don't know why no one has since tried using an engine as a fully stressed member in a road car. Maybe it's just too difficult, because I don't remember undue levels of NVH in an F50. I remember the sweetest, nicest powertrain.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And it was all just hung off the back of the car by 4 bolts.
Gear shift from third to fourth in an F50 for some reason just feels about 3 mil shorter than the other ones, and you go, oh, it's in, and what a machine. Okay, so it's interesting, and we've discussed this before, but we'll record it here now. So you benefited from someone having a look at your writing and ultimately just nudging you in the right direction, and you haven't really looked back since. Now, what you'll love, people listening to this, is that Andrew did the same to me. So he went on to Motorsport magazine and successfully edited that for many years and created some fantastic stories and covers, and then I think decided to leave and go freelance. But he still had a contract with Haymarket, and they needed him to do something. Why would they have this very useful guy still being paid for 3 months and not use him? So he was seconded back to Autocar magazine for a few months, where he had to look after some idiots, junior idiots on the road test desk, and I was one of them. And one thing we've always discussed in the pub was, if you can find it, a copy of the BMW Z8 road test. That was that weird James Bond car that BMW made. It was actually produced and developed by Bovens, even, wasn't it, from Alpina? And I wrote the road test on it. And the way in those days, the way the road test worked was that you'd write them, you'd type them up, and they would fit them, the design department would fit them into a Quark Express document, which is pictures and
Quark
word blocks.
Express, God, that's a term I haven't heard in a while.
And then you'd be given a printout of it, and it loosely fitted the page, and it would be an A4 printout, black and white. And then your line manager, such as there was one in the Autocar road test desk, would go through it and hand it back to you with comments, both style, writing style, but also the accuracy of your feedback and making sure that you were getting everything right. And Andrew was doing that for me for 3 months. It was a busy time for me because he knows how much I admired his writing. He basically was the god of the road test desk, and he gave me back the Z8 road test, and there was so much red pen on it you couldn't actually see any of the words that I'd written, and it was just a brutal awakening for me that I wasn't getting it quite right, and that I might have got a bit sloppy. And I remember sitting down with him and said, I don't quite know where to start with this, and you politely told me it might be best just to start again, and this time not take so many liberties. So yeah, in your own way, you did the same to me as Mel did to you. And I think when I read some of the young generation coming through, I mean, motoring writing is, you could say, not what it was, because it's not as popular. There aren't the opportunities, therefore it's not ensnaring perhaps as talented a group of people. But I wonder whether there are people around now for youngsters to push them in the right direction with their writing.
Well, I hope there are, and I'm available. And for the right person, if they were good, I'm not trying to sort of start up a sideline here. I would just do it because it's a slightly weird thing to say, because I'm talking about trying to train people who will eventually lose me my living. But it really worries me. There are some really good young people out there, but to be honest with you, I genuinely thought that by now I'd already been out the door, because another generation would have come across and and made me irrelevant or old and off the pace, and it hasn't happened. And I think that probably says, I'd love to say that's because I'm such a brilliant writer, but in fact, I think the truth is that next generation just hasn't turned up. And I would love to do what I can really to help youngsters along if they're in it for the right reasons. I mean, so many people historically have done it because they just love driving fast cars, and it's a strange skill set what you and I do. You've got to love cars. You properly love cars. You can't manufacture that. You've also got to be able to write. You don't have to be Hemingway, but you have to be able to write. And then there's the link between the two. You have to be able to understand the car and then communicate it. And, there were a few of us who have, for whatever reason, to whatever standard, been able to do that. And I just don't think there are that many coming through anymore, and it concerns me.
Sadly, heard news of Norman Jewess passing away at the weekend. He was Jaguar's test driver for Lord knows how many years. He became a figure of folklore because he was so associated with their glory years. D-type, E-type, Lord knows what. I was thinking over the weekend, actually, we were involved in a shambolic recreation of a part of that history, weren't we? Do you remember that? When we went to Millbrook and they'd rebuilt, someone had rebuilt the E-type that had been driven to the Geneva Motor Show.
Oh, God,
and
yes.
Wait for this.
Blew it up.
And Andrew Frankel was charged with going to drive this at Millbrook to shake it down to produce a story about this vehicle, and I had to sit shotgun and report on my hero Andrew Frankel as he drove this vehicle. So, and I also had to operate the timing gear as we went to try and recreate the 150 miles an hour, didn't we, or something at Millbrook?
Yeah.
Andrew will take over the story now.
Okay, so this was the first Jaguar prototype, 9600 HP, a car that's now owned by Philip Porter. And back in its original road test in Autocar in 1961, it did 150.01 miles per hour. And it became fairly clear, at some unspecified later on, that the only reason it did that was because it had some fairly dodgy bits in it. A D-type engine, effectively. But anyway, Philip got this car, bought the car, got it completely restored, and got it restored to the original specification. And he came to us and said, shall we go and do 150 miles an hour in it? And, and the thing is, obviously, you're not going to go and do that on the public road. I suppose we could have taken it to Germany. And there isn't any track long enough to get a car.
What's wrong with Jewess?
What was wrong with Jewess? Well, it's a rather busy public road in Belgium now, and I don't think the Belgian authorities would have had too much to say about it. So to do 150 miles an hour in a car with a top speed of 150.1, you need an awful lot of space, and you're just not going to do it on a test track, just going down a straight. So we thought we'd take it to the Millbrook Bowl. And so that's what we did. There was not enough headroom for me to wear a helmet. I think I put 20 kilos of time equipment on your lap. And off we trotted around the Millbrook Bowl, going faster and faster and faster, neatly forgetting the fact that, well, two facts really. One is that if you're going around a bowl, you are effectively cornering, and that's going to knacker your top speed anyway. So I don't think we ever got near it. I think we got to 140 something. The second thing I didn't appreciate at the time was that E-types, even travelling in a straight line at that sort of speed, aren't necessarily noted for their stability. And I think I actually bottled out just as we started to oversteer gently at 140 something miles an hour, and I think I was just wondering about whether this was probably time to call it quits when I noticed we were towing a rather large ball of smoke behind us, and that was the end of Philip Porter's brand new D-type engine.
We were going back and it was general silence. Were either of you looking at the oil pressure gauge? Yes, by the time we came in, it was low.
He was actually, to be fair to Philip, he was really good about it. I mean, I think he knew, because you're putting, it's a wet sump and they're just not designed to be subject to those sorts of forces. And I think all the oil had gone up one end of the engine. And I don't think it was cheap.
Collecting Cars, the safe, smart and simple way to buy and sell collectible cars. An online auction platform for the UK and Europe. Follow us on Instagram at Collecting Cars and also collectingcars.com.
The CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
What's your best Millbrook Bowl story? I mean, you've got one obvious one that you'll have to tell us because you always remind me of it, but there must be another one as well. What's your most obvious Millbrook Bowl story? Let me tell you what the Millbrook Bowl is. Millbrook's a test facility in the UK, for those of you listening outside the UK. And like everything in England, it's a bit smaller than it is in America. So we do have the bowl, which is 3 miles?
2 miles round.
2 miles round. And it's hands off at 100 miles an hour on the outside lane. So it'll track straight at 100 miles an hour. But if you go above 100 miles an hour, it's positive scrub on the outside front tyre. So you're effectively cornering. And so it's not a great place to test top speeds. If you can go really fast there, you're doing it because you're hanging on for dear life, really. Over to you, Andrew.
Yeah. Okay. So, so I think I figured out the one that you want to talk about. Other than that, it was trying to do a max speed test on a 3.6 964 911 turbo. We always had a rule that you had to do these things 2 up because you can't use timing equipment because the timing equipment was mounted on the side of the car and it produced too much drag. So the only way you could do it was with somebody else with a stopwatch in the car. I didn't have somebody else. I can't remember what happened to somebody else. He either elected not to get in the car or didn't turn up on the day. But the car was going back and I needed this number. So I thought to myself, I know what I'll do is I'll drive around at 100 miles an hour in the top lane, which was the speed. You couldn't get into the top lane unless you were doing 100 miles an hour. And I'll work out where my hands are on the steering wheel and I'll lash the stopwatch to the dashboard and I'll just extend a little finger. And
a pinky?
A little pinky. And I'll just every half a mile tap the button and do it and do it that way, which all sounded remarkably fine to me. Until I did it, at which stage the car is doing 171 miles an hour and understeering so much I had another half turn of lock turn and my little pinky was nowhere near the stopwatch. And I was really worried about the tyres because up there, I've had cars doing all sorts of strange things with their tyres and a thing called, do you remember the Minka?
Oh, the Minka!
The Minka, yeah, I had a tyre disintegrate.
Turbo Technics, wasn't it?
Yeah, on a 400 horsepower Minka. So I'm really worried about the tyres. And I haven't got time to stop and let the tyres cool down and work out where to put the bloody stopwatch all over again. So I just thought, I know, I'll just hold the stopwatch in my hand. So I did it. I maxed a 964, which wasn't the nicest of the car, the 3.6 turbo 964, one-handed at 174 miles an hour with as much understeer as you could ever want to have in a car. And
that's one for the health and safety people.
Yeah,
But you got a record, didn't you? Come on, let's get the record out. You were in the Guinness Book of World Book. Guinness. What's it called?
Well, it's
Guinness Book of Records.
I think it's now called Guinness World Records. It's not a book anymore.
No,
I think a book is one of its products. I think it's
look, come on, mate.
I think
Stop
it's a
being
platform
modest.
now.
There's a picture of it in your bloody bog. How fast were you?
Well, 170. I think the average was 175 or something.
In what?
Yeah, but it was also it wasn't quite a complete fraud, but it was close. So I always wanted to be in the Guinness Book of Records, but for some reason I had this fixation about breaking a record. It's not good enough to set a record because you could set a record for being the bloke who jumped up and down on one leg, wearing a silly hat on a Tuesday, and that to me wasn't really worth doing. You had to break a record which Guinness had already accepted as being a worthwhile record to break. And I looked through the book, through all the car bits, and there simply wasn't one. And so I kind of put that on the back burner until one day I was in the autocar office and the telephone rang and I happened to pick it up and it was a bloke from Guinness saying we need someone to edit the motoring pages of the Guinness Book of Records. It was my first ever freelance gig. I got paid 50 quid a year. And a kind of light went on in my head. And I thought, well, if I do this, I'll get the 50 quid, but maybe I could suggest a record. And then I thought to myself, well, what sort of record could I have set and then break? Which sounds plausible, but is in fact really easy. And I thought, how about fastest lap of a UK circuit by a production car? I thought that sounds good.
How did you get Millbrook defined as a circuit?
It goes round, doesn't it? It's a circuit. It's got a start and finish. It's a circuit. Is India a circuit?
It's bloody Frankel semantics if ever I heard it in my life.
It's a bowl in the US. Is Talladega a circuit? It's a circuit. Anyway, so I had a boss.
You're still not that sure about that. I mean, you've blustered through it.
It's a circuit. I had this boss, Howard Lees. Very sadly, he died in an aircraft crash a few years later. And so many people won't remember him. Mad bike racer. Amazing driver. And I suggested to him for a story that it might be quite good to go and set the record for being the fastest car around a circuit, a production car around a UK circuit. And I think the Testarossa was out at the time. And so off he toddled.
TR.
In a Testarossa, not a TR, get into that. And went round the circuit and did 171 miles an hour. Came back and said it had all been terribly easy. Guinness Book of Records, thank you very much. And that was it. I had my record to break. And the next year, the TR came out, which, as you know, was more powerful, more aerodynamically stable, had better tyres on it.
So you actually strategized this
Completely.
with your knowledge
Absolutely.
of Ferrari's product.
Absolutely. So I created a record, which I got somebody else to set just so I could break it.
How much faster did the TR go? Not much quicker, was it?
Didn't matter. 4 miles an hour. I think I did. Well, 4. Yeah, I think I did 175. Didn't matter. It was also the other thing is that unlike the bloody 964, which had been a nightmare, the TR was just easy. I could have been driving to the
What did
shops.
Tiff end up doing? 190 or something?
Yeah, that's crazy. I think Tiff still says that's the maddest thing he's ever done in the car. Tiff's
It
done
must
some
have
crazy
been a
stuff in the
roller
car.
coaster ride.
Have you seen the? I mean, blimey, that's. I mean, Tiff did. His average was over 190, and I think significantly over 190. There's no way in the world.
If anyone
Even back
ever
then,
tried
when
to
I
beat
was
that,
really stupid, I'd have tried to do something like that.
Yeah, I think if anyone tried to beat that, it would result in a crash.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think he did that 20-something years ago, and no one's gone near it.
I think there's my two favourite Millbrook Bowl stories. One was this one that went into slight folklore. I won't mention who they were, but there were two people that worked on the Autocar Road Test desk with me who were famous for being complete jokers. And during their greatest joker period, they wanted to sail past one of the Millbrook workers, because there were lots of drivers that worked in Millbrook that just did lots of menial work. So on the bowl, you'd start lane 1 was 50, I think 70, 80 on the way up. So they were lane 2, lane 3 guys, and they were, bless them, they had to sit in an Astra, next year's Astra, going round and round with some water containers that were fake passenger ballast, just conducting tests. They were metered up, whatever they had on them, Coravit, Datron gear, and they just go round and round and round. And the idea was that these two, it'd be hilarious if they sailed past this one of these blokes doing 80 miles an hour with no one driving the car. And they just set cruise control, because you could on the bowl. You could genuinely leave it at 80 miles an hour in the right lane, because it was so accurately built.
Yeah.
And they did. And there was all hell kicked off. I think.
And they got in the back.
Bentley Continental T. Two of them got in the back and just went past this bloke. And it took 2 laps of them going past him, I think, for him to realise and radio in and go, "There's a Bentley with no one driving it in lane 3." And I think all hell kicked off. Now, but the weirdest one I had was a guy wrote into Autocar. I'd only been there a year or two, saying that his son had been banned from driving for being caught speeding, doing 107 miles an hour in a Rover 45, I think it was. And he was convinced the vehicle wouldn't attain that speed. And so he was willing to pay us, or support us, to prove that the vehicle wouldn't do it. And I wasn't sure. And they came to me because I was the numbers geek that knew all about numbers. You know what it's like when you're road testing cars regularly. You're there 2-3 days a week.
Yeah.
You almost don't need to performance test them, because your bottom is so finely calibrated that you know what something's going to do, don't you?
Pretty much.
It was crazy. It was really weird.
Yeah, to within a tenth or two.
Yeah. And they said to me, he doesn't think it'll do it, and I thought it was marginal. I think it might. So this guy was so insistent. He brought the car along to Millbrook, and I think it was 104, 105 miles an hour. He was absolutely adamant. He brought his son along as well, who was facing a ban for this driving. And they were all set up, and they really felt this was their way to prove how innocent he was. And I went, okay, that's fine. I got in the car, and within 3/4 of a lap, she was singing along at 111 up on the top of the bus. And I just basically had to just pat them on their way and say, sorry, bang to rights.
But that's the thing. I mean, people never appreciate, and I never appreciated until I started maxing cars at Millbrook, just how long it takes a car to reach its maximum speed. It'll get up to a level, and you'll think, well, that's it. Just sit there for another couple of laps. And you'll be really surprised by how much it'll still just take up.
And also, as you're, even in something that's moderately quick, I mean, if you're doing the 110 to 125 window was never a problem. The vehicle's always fine. But once you got beyond about 125, the way the loaded front tyre would begin to just gnaw away at the tread box on the outside always shocked me.
Yeah.
Because you could get into a bit of a chasing it situation, couldn't you? It'd be Friday afternoon, want to get back, want to finish the week, but I really think I can get another 2 miles an hour out of this bad boy. So you'd stay up and you get up the top over the white line, so the wing mirror was right by the barrier, and you'd keep chasing it. And I can remember being in things like E39 528i, I think, or 530i, trying to get it to do an honest 150 on the bowl. And I came back in, and the front tyre, there was you could see fabric.
Yeah.
Because I just kept going far too long.
Yeah.
You could have a huge one, couldn't you?
Oh, in the Minka, I was only stopped because it sounded like somebody had just let off a machine gun, and this was cherry-sized chunks of rubber being fired out of the outer block of the tyre into the wheel arch. And if I'd stayed, God knows what would happen if I stayed up there any longer.
Okay, well, I think that's the point at which we're going to end part one of this Collecting Cars podcast. And I never ever thought that someone would volunteer information about the Turbo Technics Minka on one of my podcasts, but I'm very glad that Andrew did. Go and have a cup of tea, and we'll see you back in a minute. Welcome back to the Collecting Cars podcast with myself, Chris Harris at Harris Monkey, and Andrew Frankel, whose confusing array of social media tags I can't really be asked to read out again. So I'll do it. Okay, so we're at Frankel Andrew on Instagram, at Andrew _Frankel on Twitter, and also his and I will reiterate this, his frankly brilliant venture with Dan Prosser, which is called Drive Nation _ on Instagram as well. So follow that for opinion news, basically just good, wholesome motoring journalism on a platform that's full of narcissism and bollocks. Right, so we're going to come back now to some more car year stuff because I love reminiscing about this stuff.
What's going to happen now is we're going to spend the next half an hour with me just painting myself to be as the least professional person who's ever worked in this industry, aren't we?
No, well, partly that, and I'll chime in as well because obviously I've did my fair share of bad things. There was in autocar folklore a day called Black Monday, and it meant something rather different to what it meant to those in the financial markets. What was Black Monday?
The black refers to the ice that was on the road on the day in question.
Where were you going, all of you?
We were toddling off to the Millbrook test track of a apparently really rather cold Monday morning. Thing is, honest, I was living in London at the time, and it wasn't that cold when I got in the car. And the car being a 1.1S Metro, it didn't have an outside temperature to gauge. So when I hit said black ice, if you drive the normal way, the way that any nav would take you from junction 12 of the M4 to the Millbrook Proving Ground, it's a perfectly conventional bit of country road. There is, however, another route, which is an amazing bit of road. And the amazing thing is, I did it quite recently, and it's still a fantastic bit of road. So that's the way we all went. And at the very first corner on that road, I turned in, and the car didn't. So
where did the car end up?
The car ended up in a field.
Yep.
Having gone through a hedge, leaving a hole which was there for years. And there was quite a lot of damage to it. I can remember, because it was dark at the time, because it was January and it was early in the morning, I can remember roaming around the field in what was left of this Metro with the lights on, trying to find the hole that I'd made so I can get out of the field again. Eventually did that. And I was surprised to see this sort of strange intermittent light coming from apparently below the road. And I didn't know what it was. And so I sort of went off to investigate and discovered a bit further up the road a Renault 1916 valve on its side in a ditch below the surface of the road. It had fallen off the road down a ditch. But whoever was in it or had been in it had the presence of mind to put the hazard lights on, hence the flashing lights. And I can remember clambering down to this thing, rather concerned for the occupants, and finding that the car had been locked and there was nobody in it. And this was a rather familiar Renault 1916 valve in that it had been in the office car park the Friday before. And this was one of my esteemed road test colleagues who'd, fair play, he'd got further around the corner than I did. And he was, but there was no sign of him. So I started flagging down traffic to warn them of the black ice. And eventually he returned on a tractor, of all things. And the first thing he said to me when he saw the remains of the Metro at the side of the road was, "I'm so glad you crashed." And I could have taken offence to that, but his point was that he was a young lad, he was new to the department, and he thought his career was over before it had started. But if the road test editor goes off, they're not going to sack both of them. So I saved his job by binning it. And then later, now here's a great car. See if you remember this. A third member.
So what's happened with the tractor? Have you tried to extract the 19 from the ditch? Or?
No. The tractor was he was just thumbing a lift at the side of the road. The first thing that came back past was the tractor, and so he just got on that and came back. But there was a third car involved, although it escaped because it was a Golf Limited.
Ah, okay.
Do you remember the Golf Limited?
Yeah.
Golf Limited was one of the coolest cars ever built. And another of our number got round the corner. He went all the way up a bank and down again, but he did get round the corner. And made it to the track because the Golf Limited, it was a Mark II Golf. It was a 5-door single headlight Mark II Golf. The most innocent looking thing there was. But you remember at the time, back then, you could get a supercharged 8-valve engine in something like a Corrado, or you could get the 16-valve engine. What they never did was supercharge the 16-valve engine. Yeah. But they did for the Limited. Yeah. And so this it doesn't sound like much now, but back then, this had a 215 horsepower supercharged 16-valve engine in a Golf with 4-wheel drive, and it looked like something your auntie would take shopping. I mean, what a device. Yeah. I still look for them to this day, and you never find them, and when you do, they are ridiculous money. But so that was Black Monday, and we all the Metro got repaired. I don't think the 19 did, and the Golf was fine.
The Golf did go up a bank, did it?
Oh, it went right up a bank, yeah. Yes, I mean he basically, he was off. And he went up a bank, came back down, and again landed on the ground and managed not to hit anything. But yes, I mean, he was
Black Monday.
Black Monday, yes.
I don't think. I think the world's changed a bit now, hasn't it? Really, you can't really. We can laugh and joke about stuff that happened in the past, but I think that if people in our positions were found to think that stuff was funny now, we'd get told off, wouldn't we? But ultimately, you do fall off now and again, don't you? Everyone has a
I think if you do this job, I mean, the Metro, there wasn't a huge amount. And I always used to think that you were entitled, that's not true, that one big one was forgivable. And that wasn't even my big one. And I did have a big one in 1992, which was a properly big one. Funnily enough, on the same bit of road. And funnily enough, the weather did play its part in this one too. So briefly, it was January 1992. The Lancia Delta Evo had just come out, and the first one in the country, as often was the case back then, came to Autocar for road testing. And because I was the road test editor at the time, and I thought I was Juha Kankinen, and there was lots of snow around at the time, I thought I'll take it to the test track. It didn't even occur to me back then that if there's snow all over the place, the test track's unlikely to be open. Didn't even ring them up. I thought, I'm off to Millbrook. And so I get on this thing. And I was driving along far too fast, and there's a bridge, which you will know well, which is not a straight line over at all. You've got to take a line through the bridge, which I duly did at quite some speed in this Delta. And my first thing of which I was aware was looking at my own tyre tracks through the snow, crisscrossing as this car rotated. I was already quite clearly travelling backwards, and that obviously wasn't great. And the car left the road. Somebody told me later, and I don't even know to this day whether it's true, but if there is water flowing underneath something where there is very cold liquid on top of it, that liquid is likely to freeze. So there was ice on top of the bridge. Anyway, the car flew off the road and down a ditch. And because by this stage it was going backwards, because the ditch was on the right, and because it was a left-hand drive car, that meant when the car hit the far side of the bank, the car also hit me. And so that did a little bit of damage, of which at the time I was unaware. I was much more concerned about this thing was just going round and round, knocking corners off itself. It eventually got spat back out onto the road, and I sort of staggered out and wandered off to a house that was nearby, knocked on the door, because there were no mobile telephones then. And I rang the police, who said, was anybody else involved? No. Have you damaged anybody's property? No. So they said, here's the number of a recovery truck, good luck, no interest at all. And I then rang my editor of Autocar and told him what had happened. And instead of roasting me alive, which is what he should have done, he said, Andrew, are you sure you're okay? And I went, no, I'm absolutely fine. He said, no, I don't think you are. And I said, well, how do you know? You weren't there, you didn't see it. He said, no, you just sound different. You need to go to a hospital. Anyway, long and short of it was they recovered the car. I went to a hospital and mild concussion, a few broken ribs, that sort of thing, of which I was completely unaware at the time. The only slightly funny thing is that when that story, as these things always do, it gets out and the story comes back to you. And every time that story comes back to me, to this day it comes back to me, the car's parked upside down on its roof in a field. Yeah. Whereas the only panel of the car I didn't damage was its roof.
I always found, I've not had many offs, but I've ended up in a few fields, as we all have.
That was my last off. I haven't, this is a really stupid thing to say, I haven't on a road.
That don't go there.
No, okay.
No, you're not stupid, Andrew, so don't go there. For me, it was always the I suppose the anatomy of the incident from start to finish. There's the realization that it's gone wrong, and that you've got to deploy all of your skill very quickly to try and stop it going wrong. Then there's the quite often realization that you've deployed your skill, you've been found wanting, and this is going to happen regardless of what you can do. Then it happens, and then it stops, and then more often than not, because modern cars are quite safe and have been for a long time, you get out of it and you dust yourself down and you say, blimey, got away with that, or it's not been great, but I'm okay. All that stuff you could deal with. For me, it was the gap between that point and getting the thing recovered and sorted out. I hated that bit. It was the sort of standing around, begging for help, looking like a total arse in front of... that's the bit. I'm not proud. I just hated it.
Because you can't put it in the past until that's happened.
And you spent...
it's still an ongoing situation.
And you've got too much time to go back and try and think what could have been done to not be there. And of course, there's always some very obvious things that you could have been doing not to be there. Chief among them, normally, to go 50 miles an hour slower.
Yes.
But I hated that bit. And I remember the first time it happened to me was Peugeot 206 Gti Launch. And it's my first hot hatch that I'm doing, probably standalone for Autocar magazine. Gone on the launch. Mr. Richard Meaden, who'll be appearing in this on this podcast at some point, was there as well. But he was writing for Eve, I was writing for Autocar. So I'm there with the big guns, the fast guys, and I go out to drive this thing, and the Autocar photographer, Steve Papios, whatever you call him.
Satan Papadopoulos, I seem to believe.
Stan's been there he's been there for a long time. He's seen it all. And I come around this corner and I think what I'll do is I'll just back off on the way in just to get that lovely, that characteristic Peugeot hot hatch thing where you've got a bit of oversteer, maybe a bit of three wheels. And I couldn't have got it more wrong. I was too late in the corner, which was always the worst thing you could do in a Peugeot. So I've come out of the corner, full gas, lifted off, and it's just got a massive swapper on. And we're somewhere near Divonne, like just over the Swiss border into France.
Can you say that again, please?
Divonne. And there's a tidy, what I thought was 3-4 foot down into the fields. So the road is raised up. So it looks like fenland, really. And as I left the road, it dawned on me that it wasn't 3 foot. It was probably more like 6-7 foot. I just went straight off, and the first thing that hit the ground was the bumper. It was so vertical when it went in, the bumper hit the ground, not the wheels. So I then headbutted the steering wheel, did the whole lot. Bags didn't go off, which was weird because it had I think it had an airbag. And then you're in this really weird position because I'd only been driving the car for 20 minutes and I already knew it was a catastrophic disappointment because what we were looking for was the new 205 GTI. And that the most awkward position someone can be put in as a motoring journalist for me is that one where you know the car's shit. You're just getting ready to tell the world how bad it is, and then you go and damage it. So you think, I'm not sure I can go through with my plan because I've damaged this thing, and they've got recourse to say, well, you're an idiot. You couldn't drive it properly, and this had just happened. And I fired it into the field, and I remember I just thought, well, this is a disaster. First of all, I'm out of a job because, like you, they were looking for ways to get rid of me because I was largely out of control. And even the small bits they thought were positive, they couldn't deal with. I can remember my editor saying, we simply can't send you out in public representing this brand because you don't know how to behave. I mean, the same could be said today probably, but I really didn't know what to do. And but I was keen, and I think the enthusiasm got me through a bit. I remember standing in this field thinking, what I want to happen now is for this car to be out of this field. And it didn't. It just stayed there for ages. And I couldn't get rid of it. And Stan, bless him, wasn't much help because he couldn't be asked. He'd seen it so many times and he thought I was a bit of a dick anyway. So we stood there. But I remember thinking, it should be more damage than this. Because the front PU was fine. The bumper was moved a bit, but I managed to get underneath it and play with some of the mountings and bend the mounting back. And I thought, this thing looks fine, actually. It just doesn't look too bad at all. And we took it to a jet wash. We got a tractor to drag it out, but that took an hour and a half or something. So by that stage, I just felt awful. And I thought, I want to get it back to the launch venue and never see it again. And I'm going to fly out tomorrow morning. So it was all looking good. I got to a jet wash, cleaned it all off. I thought, I've got away with this. I fired this thing into a field head first, and I've got away with it. And I drove it back to the launch venue. I'm probably going to get a letter from Peugeot now, 20 years later. And as I handed it over, I got that awful tingling fear you get when you almost pass out because you think, oh my God, and you're in public and you can't acknowledge it. As I handed the car over and they were looking at it, I thought, there's nothing wrong with this. And I looked up and there was a massive crease on the sunroof. There was a metal crease.
Ooh.
So I'd done no damage to the engine or powertrain or body or actual cosmetic bodywork, but I had written the shell off. I just thought, I can't face this. And I said, bye. And I just walked off.
And they hadn't seen it?
No, there was a conversation afterwards, I think. Maybe a few weeks later when they worked out that the one I'd been driving was no longer symmetrical. But yeah, it didn't happen to me too many times. But I have to say that was the one. That was the first one. And it was the wait between shunt and getting just get it out of the way. Please just remove the crime from the scene. You
just want the event to be in the past.
Yeah.
And while it is still there in front of you, it is very much an ongoing situation.
Yeah, I remember Meaden on that trip. I think he had a whoopsie as well. Didn't they? When he comes on, he'll confirm. They borrowed some bloke's 205 GTI. I think the handbrake failed up on the hill, and that sort of rolled into a wall. And I remember Peugeot. The disaster wasn't complete because Peugeot, in a sort of visionary move, had decided that rather than give people a gift on a launch event, we can come back to those in a minute. This awful policy that car makers had years ago, that to try and create impartiality through journalists, when you got to your room, there'd be a very expensive gift that would in no way render you impartial.
All of which I'm sure you always left in the room.
Oh, I did, yeah. I gave them all away. I can see you've got a room full of them here, Andrew. And how is your B&O Zeppelin? And the... Sorry, B&W, isn't it? We've all done it. But what Peugeot did was they said, rather than give you that's pre-iPod, isn't it? Rather than give you a tape recorder, we're going to give you a DIY tree planting kit. Which was quite out there, actually. And I remember thinking, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So they gave us a bulb or whatever, something from a tree to grow. It's all in a box. And they gave us a vacuum-packed thing of mulch. So mulched bark and wood chippings and soil in a bag. Now, a vacuum-packed lump of mulch looks and both smells not unlike marijuana. So I take a flight on my own and I walk through Heathrow Airport, and I'm a small, swarthy man with a beard, and I've just been on holiday, I think, as well. So I don't look good. I don't look like the kind of bloke that should be walking through Heathrow carrying a bag of what could be marijuana. I think I landed at 1 p.m. I think at 6 they let me out of the building and told me that in future I shouldn't carry mulch through an airport. And that I probably shouldn't do. And I said, would you mind contacting Peugeot and asking them not to give it to me? And they said, okay.
I've always noted when you and I travel abroad in cars together, I always sort of factor in a little bit of time for the fact that you're in the car. So we are going to get pulled apart at the border.
Do you remember that? The first time that happened was when my Lotus Exige broke when we were at the Nürburgring on a track day 20 years ago. And you had a gorgeous 993 RS. And you gave me a lift back kindly. We were driving back through the French side of the Channel Tunnel. And you went, I'll be on the train in 5 minutes. I went, something you need to know about travelling with me, Andrew, is I just look like a wrong 'un. Wherever I go, I could be anything. I've been accused of being Mexican, Chechnyan, Albanian, Turkish. I'm always the one that you don't want in your country, basically.
Yes.
And we
Or in your car.
We drove through, and I said, "This might take some time." We went, "No nonsense, we'll be fine." And 10 minutes later, when they were asking you to open the front of your car, and you said, "This is ridiculous." 993 RS. You owned a 993 RS. I know we shouldn't say it. Don't.
Yeah. I mean, I owned 993 RS and I loved it. And do you know what? It was a really nice car. I bought it from Nick Four. I was one of those idiots. You know, the way Nick used to sell cars was he'd go to the ring on one of these track days with a car, and you go for a lap of the ring with him in the car. And at the end of it, before you're basically out of the foxhole, you bought the car, and that's what I did. And it was a beautiful yellow, completely standard car, never been crashed. But I wanted to do some racing. And I didn't have the money. All the money that I had was tied up in the 993. And so I sold it and I bought a Camaro and I raced that for a couple of years and couldn't afford to do that anymore. And then, I didn't have a 993 and I wasn't racing. Bad mood.
We got some more positive stories coming, hopefully. I was trying to think the other day, what's the best car that I road tested when I was at Autocar? And trying to define the best car is a bit like trying to compare cricket batsmen in different eras. It's very difficult because circumstances change and the significance of a vehicle needs to be viewed in the context of when it was launched. But I've got a pretty good idea of what I think was the best car I road tested now, looking back. Because I drove down the same road that I first drove it on the other day, and I was in a very modern car, and it didn't feel as good as that car did 20 years ago.
Go on.
Ford Focus is the best car that I road tested.
Original
standard 1.8 Focus was just staggeringly good.
Yeah.
I'm still suspicious of how good the dampers were on the car.
Yeah.
Because there was all sorts of jiggery pokery going on.
But that was back in the day. I mean, Ford has quite rightly carved itself an enviable reputation for, making even its least if you like, driver focused car, still fairly dynamic, but it came from that, and before that the Mondeo as well, because if you remember the stuff that they produced before that, the Mark IV Escort, the later generations of Sierras, I mean, this was just so much rubbish. I can remember on the Mondeo launch, it was one of those weird launches where you knew the car was going to be good before you even sat in it, and that's not me judging it ahead of the event. It was because Ford rang up and said, "If you want to bring any rivals down, we'll transport the lot for you." Now, you don't
That's confidence.
You don't do that if you're not and usually if you've gone to Ford launches before that, if you got to talk to anybody, it would be some well-briefed marketing bloke who just talked bollocks to you. And back there were just engineers everywhere, clearly with no media training at all, who would just talk to you about this car. And long before you thought, if this car turns out to be rubbish, I mean, they have played an absolute blinder. And of course, you got in the car and it was totally game changing, not just for...
Was that 92?
93. January 93.
And you did something stupid. How many miles did you do it in a week?
Okay, yeah, so that. So the original plan, I devised a plan to do 10,000 miles in a week. It was just a nice round figure. And we thought if we divided it up into teams of people who'd each have the car for 24 hours, then not only would it do it, but the car could go to some quite interesting places. And so there were a load of them, and it went off down to Portugal and back, and then it went to Italy and back, and one bunch of people decided to try and do 10 countries in 24 hours. And so it did. Anyway, the problem was they all did their jobs a bit too well. So by the time the last leg came along, we had 24 hours, and this was Steve Sutcliffe and me. We had 238 miles to do, which would have taken about 3 of the 24 hours. And we just thought, well, this is no way to end it. This is no kind of story at all. And so I don't know which. It was probably, knowing the bloke, it was probably Steve. Steve said, well, why don't we do 12,000 miles? And, clearly that was nuts. But, Steve isn't the sort of person to duck away from such a challenge, and back then I don't suppose I was either. And this was a 90 horsepower 1.6 Mondeo. It was the cheapest, lowest power Mondeo you could get, and we got in it, and we made it to Lyon from Calais in 4 hours. We were at sea within 6. I think we averaged 108 to the south of France. That's including fuel stops. I mean, I should probably say as some kind of sort of hygiene notice now that, I don't, at the time it didn't strike me as being a particularly good idea, and I would never ever behave that way now. But at the time you're young and you're stupid, and and you've got a job to do, and it sounded like a great story. So rightly or wrongly, we did it, and we did 2,326 miles in 24 hours in a 1.6 Mondeo. And the thing that only Steve and I know to be true, and I think our mates who know us know it to be true, but I don't think that the thing that anybody believes is that we did it with 90 seconds to spare. We got over the line with 90 seconds of the week left, is when we did the 12,000th mile. And that is absolutely true. And there were entire tanks. You'd come out of a service station and you'd redline it through every gear and put it in fifth, and you put your foot down. And unless you copped a péage, you wouldn't lift until the next time you had to refuel it. We got it to do 14.1 to the gallon. And it burned, in that week, it burned 1.5 times its own weight in fuel.
It's weird, isn't it? Because I love hearing the stories, but in the context of our careers as they are now, it would just be viewed as waste, wouldn't it? Why would you use so much fuel to go and do something like that? It's really strange.
Because it's a great story, and the fact that whatever it is, 26 years later,
we're still talking about it.
We're still talking about it.
And I think that's one of the great shames of the modern car media environment, is that video has opened us up to a whole new amazing world of seeing cars sliding, of confirming the way they behave, rather than just allowing a little bit of poetic license through the writer. But you can't build these stories through a film the way that we used to in magazines. I still feel a more complete knowledge of a vehicle if I've read about it than if I've watched an hour about it, weirdly.
I think it's also why when you guys on Top Gear or the other mob go off and do big adventures, I think that's why they probably last longer in the memory, because they are, at the end of the day, stories.
Yeah.
You're not just reporting facts, however well crafted, about a machine. It almost becomes a prop. It becomes a device. It becomes a player within that story. And as journalists, that's what ultimately we are. We should be tellers of stories as feature writers. And sadly, because deadlines get ever shorter and budgets get ever smaller, there's just less scope, particularly within what I would describe as conventional motoring journalism, and particularly given how much of it is now migrated online. There's just less space and scope to do these stories, which is why old gits like you and me sit here reminiscing about stuff that happened a quarter of a century ago.
The irony is it's populating a podcast now, you see. There you go.
There you go.
New media supported by memories of old media.
Yeah.
The 2CV. So, about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I bought a 2CV. I'd always wanted one. I wanted a Mahari, actually, but I couldn't afford one. So I thought I'd buy an early 2CV, an AZ with a 425cc engine. Very soon afterwards, you bought one. Not because I'd bought one, because you'd wanted one as well. But I think we bought one in the same year. And now we have a kind of ongoing rivalry about our 2CVs. I mean, there's a mutual respect about our vehicles, but ultimately it's a bit like having a mate who's got a dog the same as your dog. You don't mind his dog, but you're pretty convinced that your dog's more obedient and all round a bit of a better dog. But the great thing is our cars couldn't be more different, could they?
No, your car is rough as a bear's arse, and my car is beautiful. But the thing is, I kind of would rather it were the other way around. Because to me, the ultimate gun car, whatever it is, there was a bloke, and there may still be, who used to race a C-Type Jaguar. And this was the roughest C-Type you've ever seen in your life. It looked like it had just been dug out of a ditch somewhere. But it was mechanically perfect. And I just loved seeing that car, because every ding, every story that car had, every experience it had ever had was written all over its bodywork. And I just loved that. And cars that look like yours, rather than show queens like mine, to me have a character and a texture that, beautifully restored things, as my car is, just don't have.
But equally, yours as an object is gorgeous. And what I'm learning about mine is that as it ages, it is beginning to lose. You can't appreciate the engineering quite the same way, because everything's got dent or always covered in rust, and I'm beginning to feel that with mine now. I like the patination. I like the fact that it's already got damage that I've created, or I point at Neil, we've created. I mean, there's the driver's side rear door. They've got a massive dent in it, because when we were recording the first film we ever did on it up in the Forest of Dean, I was driving along trying to do a cornering shot, whatever that is in a 2CV, and I got the thing up to about 46, which is close to its maximum on the straight, thinking this is brilliant. And the driver's door wasn't latched, but it flew open at 46 miles an hour. And the noise it makes, because at that point it just becomes a percussion instrument, doesn't it?
And the door handle hits the rear door.
Yeah, I mean, it nearly went straight through the skin of the door. Have you had that happen?
You see, but I had to have mine repaired, didn't I? Whereas you could leave yours, and it's another part of that car story. It's another great thing you and I. So
it happened to you as well.
Exactly the same
bloody
thing happened
shocking.
To me.
The noise it
made.
The
noise. It's like someone's just let off a shotgun now. But no, I had to get it. I had to get it repaired.
Because it would have looked old, wouldn't it?
It would have looked horrible. Yeah.
So you've now got a new engine. But I'm surprised. Okay, we're not going to go into this story because it could end in a punch-up. But ultimately, I think my car's a bit quicker. I think I might have a slightly hooky engine. It's definitely 425cc, but there are some key factors in the fact that my car might have a bit more straight-line performance than Andrew's used to. Anyhow, he's now upgraded his engine to. He's got 4 stud heads. 4
stud head. Very important to have a 4 stud head. Mine's from my engine. I do still have the original 3-studder.
Do you?
Yes, sitting on a bench, which could go back in at any time. But no, I have one from a 64 van, which is meant to have, I think, 17.5 horsepower.
As opposed to 12 as standard.
As opposed to 12 as standard.
So Andrew and I line up on the way back from a drink in the public house, a soft drink, I hasten to add. And we test these cars by, first of all, saying we're not going to do any kind of dicing on the way home, but we'll just drive home. And of course, within a minute, we're going up a hill and we're in a full race situation. But the great thing about the 2CV is you can be in a full race situation on the public highway going up a hill, and you are doing no more than 18 miles an hour. So you're not affecting anyone else at all. And as
you're probably holding them up.
As we were going up the hill, it dawned on me that Andrew wasn't getting away from me. So he should have had 5 horsepower more than my engine. And on the way home, we were pretty closely matched. Well, I think mine might still have a slight edge.
And it's always easier to follow.
It is. So maybe I was in the slipstream, and there was some aero in there. Maybe the same things that affected Sebastian Vettel affected me that day. But what we need to acknowledge here publicly is there are 2 factors in this. One, you're a bigger man than me, Andrew. Not just morally, but physically, you're a bigger man than me. And these cars don't weigh much. And I think the fact that a couple of extra stone on you compared to me might have an effect.
Possibly.
Oxidation as well.
Yes.
I think there must be 10 kilograms of paint and trim in your car that just doesn't exist on mine now because it's been lost as atoms to the atmosphere. So I think what we need to do, and we'll agree this in public now, is before the end of the year, we're going to take them to Millbrook. We talked about Millbrook here. We'll make a film of this. We'll go to Millbrook with the 2 cars. I'll pay for the testing. And we will use the bowl to get realistic VMAX speeds from them. We won't be allowed anywhere near the outside lane. In fact, we won't even make it to lane 3, will we?
No, very definitely will lane 2 exercise.
We will use the straight to produce a full set of Autocar data, and we will then get the original template for an Autocar twin test from the mid-90s.
But we have to do it twice in each other's cars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unless we ballast you up.
Well, once we've gone to the weighbridge, then we can work it out, can't we? But we have to answer this question because I don't understand why mine's quicker.
Mine should be quicker.
It should be.
There's no question at all because I've also got, apparently, so I'm told, a slightly higher compression head and a bigger carburettor, although I'm beginning to wonder whether any of this is true.
Oh, they are. There's something about them. I think it's the last car I'd sell.
I mean, there is, but I also think, being faintly serious for a second, I think that there is a lesson to be learned because, that drive back from the pub, you and I, we've been very lucky, you in particular, to have driven all sorts of amazing things. And I would say that in terms of just fun, however defined, that you can have in a car, I think I've probably had as much fun cocking about with you in 2CVs than I've had in almost anything else.
In the last 12 months, that's the best drive I've had.
And, when we look forward to an age where our speeds are all limited and when our cars start shopping us to the authorities and this, that and the other, I won't be that bothered because I will know there is... no one's ever going to impose a speed limit that's going to trouble my 2CV. And if I drive it as fast as I possibly can, it'll just about keep up with the traffic. And here's another important point. If you're just about keeping up with the traffic, if you find a gap in that traffic, if you drive a modern supercar, there are no gaps in traffic because you're always at the next clump of traffic because all gaps just disappear. 2CVs, you can have the road to yourself for a day because the car behind you never catches you and you never catch the car in front. And you just spend much more time doing what you want to do, which is driving, having fun on empty roads. And the slower the car is, the more likely that is to happen.
Yeah, no, I'm completely in agreement. And I suppose that brings us back full circle to what we were talking about, the X7 earlier. And the concept of the 2,000 horsepower electric sports car. They're all barking up the wrong tree. Collectively, the car industry has got itself lost into some rabbit holes, I think. The first of which is, in sports car terms, is this need to show that they're replacing the internal combustion engine with something that's even more powerful. This electric motor is going to come along, and whereas you used to have 600 horsepower, you're going to have 1,000, then 2,000 horsepower.
But that's what they have to do, because what else? I mean, they can't make them sound better.
No.
They can't make them feel more tactile. They know they're going to be heavier because that's just the nature of the beast. So what have they got? The only thing they can do is, we'll make them faster, because that's the easy thing to do.
You'd have to think that at some point the next Gordon Murray's going to come along and say, it might be Gordon Murray, I don't know, and say, well, why can't we just make it lighter? Why can't we take a smaller motor, make it more efficient, and have 150 horsepower and 600 kilograms? I think it will happen. Like anything, it will get lighter and smaller.
It will, and I think that there's a lot of potential in solid state. And once people start throwing away their lithium-ion batteries, I think that there are all sorts of good things that come from that. But solid state, it's almost like fuel cells. It's one of these things that's always 5 to 10 years away. So
haven't seen it yet.
No, I think did Toyota or someone say that they might have one next year? I don't know, but if someone has find a way to productionize a solid state battery, and obviously this is what everybody thinks Mr. Dyson is up to. He has bought a company that made solid state batteries, and if he's found a way to do that, then that could be very interesting. But in terms of the here and now and what we actually know, I think you're right. I think they are going the wrong way. Bigger, heavier, faster. No, lighter, smaller, funnier.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just to continue that, we are going through a bit of a twilight period of the internal combustion engine supercar, aren't we? Everyone seems to be knocking them out now, whilst they feel they still can. And we've got some incredible stuff coming. We've got Valkyrie, and following that will be a series of Aston Martins with a load of power that are in the shadow of that car. Ferrari is they're hybridizing stuff, but they're going to launch this SF90 with 1,000 horsepower. And in supercar terms, it's not that expensive. I mean, I know that's a preposterous way to describe it.
It's a third of the price of a LaFerrari.
Exactly.
Just as powerful.
And when you look at the way people spec up or are paying premiums for GT2 RSs, it's not far off.
Yeah.
And this Brabham that you've just driven as well. I mean, I have to say, and this will be disappointing for some people, I'm slightly over it all at the moment. It seems every single week another crazy piece of machinery is launched that I don't know how you use it, where you use it, what you do with it. I'm still confused by the whole.
I'm always interested in cars that do stuff that cars haven't done up until that moment, even if it's an academic interest. I mean, the Valkyrie really, really interests me. I'm just, don't tell me that a car designed by Adrian Newey isn't going to be an intrinsically interesting thing. It just is. And I had a very close look at one at the Geneva show, and the packaging, what they've managed to squeeze in there is just extraordinary. And I think it will be, the McLaren F1 of its generation, albeit in a very different way, because let's not forget the F1 did all it would do while seating 3 people with decent air conditioning, music machine, and lots of luggage space. But it's the Gordon Murray car that really interests me. That's the one that really interests me, because the T50.
What's the engine?
It's a 3.9 or 4 litres, just under 4 litre, normally aspirated V12, 650 horsepower, 6-speed H pattern, manual gearbox.
That is going to be something special.
And a fan. Now, what I don't know, what nobody's answered, and I should just ask the question, is whether the fan is switchable. Because I can see how the fan could work if you're on a track. I don't know how you seal the car to the track, but I guess Gordon's thought of that. But if you're just driving down, the high street, are you just not going to be spitting,
Yeah, there is. I'm sure NASA created some material that you can buy now that allows it to rub against the road, but it wouldn't last for long.
No.
Also, what questions you never thought you'd be asked? When have you ever needed downforce on the road?
Well, you don't. That's why I think it might be switchable.
Yeah.
You know, I can only see bad things coming from the fan on the road, but on the track, it could be quite good fun.
The Brabham, the Brabham fan car. Yeah, I'm fascinated by the engineering and the concepts. I think the idea of driving them on the road. I mean, if you gave me a Valkyrie now to drive to Yorkshire to go and do a story, I think the drive to get to the destination would just be fraught with worry. Not
But that's not what it's for, is it?
No, so what is it for then?
It's for I think it's for incredibly wealthy people to say, I've got a Valkyrie. I think that's its primary purpose. But I think it is for probably quite a small number of those people to provide an on-track experience, unlike anything that they could get anywhere else. I suppose you could go buy a second-hand P2 car and get somewhere near it. But I don't know, until we drive it. I don't think these things.
I had to go in the sim. Did you do the sim thing? I drove the simulator.
No.
The lap time in a low power configuration compared to a generic 700 horsepower car was ridiculous at Spa, and certainly so my radar sort of GT3 pace or an uncorked GT3 car is what I can visualize a circuit at, and I saw Spa at a different speed to that, certainly.
Yes.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Because normally these street cars are held back to about that level of performance. GT3 is about as far as they go. Okay, so before we finish, just one thing I wanted to ask you. I drove a car with a DFV in it recently.
Oh yeah.
I haven't driven one of those before, and it made me realise that I think I need to own a DFV of some sort. Do you think is that the most special engine? Do you think?
Yes and no. In terms of what it did, the things that it powered, it's completely unrivaled, unapproached. Everything. It won Le Mans twice. It was in F5000 cars. It was in F1 cars. It was in Supervan. It was in everything. Serious from that point of view. But as you all know, it's very much a device for doing a job.
Yeah.
It's not something that you're going to get. It's not a soundtrack you'd want played at your funeral. It's it ain't a flat 12 Alpha. It's a very much meat and potatoes engine. I mean, fantastically effective at getting the job done. And they're much nicer today than they used to be.
I can imagine that modern metallurgy means they are much better. And
Yeah,
also,
and the electronics as well.
But they do sound. The installations do sound very different according to where the intakes are and how long the exhausts are and the way they're shaped. Certainly, the Lotus 79 that I drove.
Yeah.
That was a really nice sounding one. It sounded gorgeous.
Yeah. They do sound good, but you're still, at the end of the day, you're dealing with a flat plane V8. And they're just not going to sound as nice as, go and listen to a Matra or a V12 Ferrari from.
So best sounding engine.
Matra.
Do you reckon? They do sound ridiculous when you hear them.
I think.
So flat 12 Matra.
V12 Matra.
Sorry, V12 Matra.
Yeah, I think that's of them all. I think that's the one for me.
787B.
No. I mean, fascinating, interesting. I mean, wow, but no, absolutely not. It's not a beautiful noise. You can't listen to a 787B and just think that that's some kind of music you're listening to. It's not. It's just. I mean, it's just an assault on your senses, isn't it?
It's just air being ripped apart, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Really? But I do love the sound. Matra, yes. I still think a flat 12 Ferrari done right is a very complicated, rich sound because it's unexpected.
In a road car, particularly.
Yeah. That's the only reason I've kept that TR. Probably is I love the car, but I think
that's a superb engine.
But there's nothing else that sounds like that.
No, and it is a very different sound to a V12.
But there is a particular sound for me that I think it's you just described it as being the music when you played at your funeral. I love, and I will the sound that will always make the hairs on my neck stand up more than any other is just a sort of anything around 3 litre flat six Porsche engine on proper pipes, but with the proper injection pump on it. When that kind of induction hammer comes in, and if they're revving high between about 6 and 8, when they're really going, that's an extraordinary noise, and that's my favourite noise. It's not in terms of quality. It's not the highest quality noise. It's probably not the most spectacular, but it's the one that makes me just go wow when I experience it.
Just talk to me for a minute about the noise of a short tail 917 in those terms.
Yeah, but that's why the flat 12 noise is so fascinating for me, because there's something about those opposed cylinder sounds that there's a richness to the noise that makes it sound Porsche, but luxury Porsche. I don't know how to describe that. So quite often when I'm in a 512 TR driving that, say quite often that sounds ridiculous, when I'm driving one, that it sounds as Porsche as it does Ferrari to me in some respects. They're quite complicated sounds. But that engine in that car, and we at Goodwood, Andrew and I both drove some factory museum cars, just as a demonstration run. Andrew was in the 917-30, which was just an incredible machine, and I was in a short tail 917, which is just, for me, was almost too much to handle. It's the car of my dreams, car I used to draw as a child, and just amazing. And I think it had torque from nowhere, just kept pulling, but it wanted to rev. It was completely amenable. I'm sure it's got some modern electronics that help it, but it was just amazing. And also, like all great engines, its sound wasn't consistent. It made different noises, volumes. Everything changed as it went through its revs. And I think, again, Porsche have always done that really well for me. Porsche engines, they create different noises at different points in the rev range. And that thing did just that. But the ultimate sound it made when it was singing beyond about 5, I don't have the adjectives really.
Yes.
But I would, that could be played at my funeral, thanks.
Yes. I mean, the turbo car makes an amazingly rich sound, and because of the potential that comes with it, it is part of an incredible experience. But there's no question at all that whether you're talking about a 911 or a 917, normally aspirated cars just sound better.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
They just do. Right, I think on that note, I'd like to say a big thank you to Andrew for sitting down. We'll do this again with him, and we'll maybe even drag some of his offspring in as well, because they've got some good stories to tell. But go and have a look at Drive Nation. Go and continue reading his brilliant work in Autocar Motorsport magazine, and follow him on social media. So Andrew, and from myself, Chris Harris, and Collecting Cars, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.